Hmm. Alright, so, okay. I don't know if this is actually recording my video, which I guess is for the best because I have my shirt off. I thought that this would be appropriate to today's theme, but I figured, whatever, because, there's more mystery, if we don't go with this theme. So, the theme today is that of sexuality and gender. And there are a few things, seem peculiar to my generation of people, or what we're being exposed to right now, especially academically, which very much terrifies me. I've always been skeptical of academia as a power structure. It seems very peculiar and counterintuitive to like what living a happy life is. And the more I talk to people from older generations, such as the 1960s, and I hear, about just how wonderful it was living in that counterculture time, and how inclusive the hippies were, and how little people really cared about the system or the corruption in the system because they expected it to be corrupt. The more I'm shocked by this generation and its lack of imagination, its lack of individuality, and how tacitly it consents to being made into a series of, frankly, proto-fascist social units. Because where the hippies had something of a counterculture, a youth movement aimed at change, led by intellectuals, pervaded by artists, and really was inclusive and had its own ethos and ethic, that stood in blatant opposition to the system of control, of capitalism, of consumerism, and all of that, and just was seeking a higher way in every sense of the word. Even though in Taoism they say the Tao seeks the lowest path, the one that human beings abhor, but it's still, off the beaten track of the consumerist dream of the 50s. Our generation has nothing like that. And we pretend towards progressivism. It's really funny that all of our progressivism is not only fruitless, but fundamentally engineered by the very system that we're supposed to be opposing. It's almost like a form of extortion, right? The very people publishing statistics on wage disparity and all these other supposed symptoms of capitalism, which, by the way, is totally a first world problem. Wage disparity isn't even an issue. Like, honestly, for any hippie would laugh at the notion that you think you're oppressed because you get paid less than someone else. It's like, why are you working in the first place, right? But it's funny that even while we claim to have this awareness of the corruption within the system, the people feeding us this information is the system itself. And it becomes most clear, I think, when I'm watching a video, something from the San Diego Opera, and it's a documentary of their edition of Salome, which is a classic opera, very provocative opera by Oscar Wilde. And I have to sit through this bullshit advertisement for a Wendy's sandwich because I don't even know how long the advertisement's going to be. I don't care, but I can't skip the ad. I don't want to miss any of the details of the video. And basically, the notion of the advertisement is just blatant in your face, bullying consumerism. It's literally not even trying to be subtle. It's literally telling you you can't stop thinking about this sandwich. And admittedly, right now I can't. And I did love having those Wendy's sandwiches, but why do I want one right now? It's almost like, an ex who's manipulative, who you really like her, you like messing around with her, but she's basically manipulating you into it, so you kind of like feel awful about even the fact that you're attracted to her again, because you know that you got to like save her money or whatever. You can't go out on dates with her. And right afterwards, it's so hilarious, fucking hilarious. They show you a photo of all of the social media websites. And it reminded me of this shirt I saw on Quora, the shirt design that said, "Weapons of Mass Distraction." It's basically, and it basically had all of those symbols, YouTube, which I'm using right now, incidentally, Facebook, which I never fucking use anymore, even though I'm really tempted to because there are some hot babes on it, and we'll get into that issue in a moment, and Tumblr and all of this bullshit. And I think, if there's an Illuminati, and at least mythologically there is, they're really basically fucking putting it right in your face right there. Like, look, you can't stop us. You can't stop us, nigga. This shit's real, Consumerism's not going away, advertising's not going away, and we've made it into the Ministry of Magic. I mean, we've made it into academia. And it's fucked up because there's a related video, which I mean, it caught my eye, of course, but it was a 2012 rendition of Salome, and it's an Australian thing. And you know how these Australians, they tend to fuck up art a lot. Like, I don't know, Australian Pink Floyd's pretty much over the top. I don't know. I mean, Australian art isn't my favorite. Let me just put it that way. Sorry, but AC/DC, fuck them. The thing is, this version of Salome is very postmodern, because it has the Dance of the Seven Veils, but it's not like the traditional, like, classy striptease with the seven veils in it at all, which kind of defeats the whole point of the art, but it just abstracts away from it and replaces it with, like, a dance involving, like, 7 different, like, strippers or something, and one is, like, Marilyn Monroe, and the other is, like, this dark, like, Asian chick or something, and by dark I mean, like, she's wearing black. And it's so funny because I don't see its relevance at all. Salome, incidentally, for those of you who don't know, in the Dance of the Seven Veils, whenever I watch it as an opera, and I didn't watch the whole opera, I just watched, frankly, videos of this dance. Because actually a friend of mine, a wonderful girl, told me about this song by a gothic artist called The Seven Veils. Anyway, so that's how I found out about it. But every time I watch a rendition of it, you get the impression like the woman just loves it. This is no joke. I mean, you can tell when someone's faking it. I really hate this passive-aggressive thing of saying, well, you can't tell. What the fuck kind of epistemology is that? It's right in front of you. You can tell. You can tell when these artists are being interviewed about the part of Salome, that they're really passionate about whatever they commit themselves to. You know, there's this notion of artists, a really good artist, they're sincere about the roles that they play. And there's a notion of responsibility for owning up to your role and really embracing it. And I don't think it's just a fiction, a dream of passion, like Hamlet would say. And you can tell women love getting into this role. They love dancing like this. Well, any man who's been blessed enough to have had a woman in one's life knows when a woman's passionate. And really great actresses and dancers, they can really invoke Salome, and God, that sounds like an innuendo. Sorry. And there's something earthly about it, and the significance of this work of art by Oscar Wilde. Like so many of Oscar Wilde's works is provocative. Oscar Wilde himself, incidentally, said that I think this is why it makes me so indignant when people would say, "Oh, you don't know that they're really into it." He says, "Only a fool doesn't judge by appearances." What it is, it's supposed to be provocative. Because after so many years of sexual repression, finally women got to express their desire to satisfy a man. And it wasn't like because she was like flirting with Herod. I don't know if it's the same Herod from the Jesus myth. I don't know. But it's not like this is a symbol of patriarchy. Because honestly, man, I'll be honest. Like what women say or what men say about women going for bad boys is true. Like, even the most feministic women will still go for the bad boy, and will even use feminism. Even a girl who isn't, like, a conventional feminist will still use feminism to argue in favor and in the defense of the bad boy. I've seen it done. The thing about it is, this is an expression, though, of an aspect of human nature. One that both men and women might find questionable. But it does happen, and there's something beautiful about that. There's something primordial about that. There's something natural about that. And what frustrated me about this rendition, this Australian rendition, was they replaced that. They totally took away all the artistry of it. Of the Dance of the Seven Veils is not a stereotype. It's not even an archetype. It's its own thing, its own situation. And they replaced it with like a social commentary, I feel, on how sexuality is a construct, which is total nonsense. I think all of the postmodern innovators would scoff at this notion because it's so structuralist, actually. You know, Derrida said, his whole thing was saying, look, part of post-structuralism is not to try to make something which is artificial appear natural. But he never said there wasn't anything that was natural. And in a way, turning something natural into something artificial and saying it's all artificial is going in the opposite extreme. For instance, Imagine taking a gender studies class and having to identify each of the stereotypes in this video. Well, you wouldn't really be able to do it because, and you know, I have to say, my frustration with this is no different from my frustration with this kind of bullshit in high school, except the only difference is in high school, most of my peers didn't give a damn about it. Because they were out actually living and experimenting with their own bodies, you know? My frustration is that a lot of my peers seem to believe in this bullshit. And it seems like a way of escaping responsibility for their natures. And how they choose to act out of their natures, more importantly. Like, the thing is, just like in the 8th grade, we had, like, a series of poems that our teacher, Lawrence Madkins, which, I mean, bless his soul, you know, U.S. veteran of Native American and African American descent, very progressive, liberal thinker. Bless his soul, like, I totally disagreed with him about poetry. Because there were different categories that he broke poetry up into, and I frankly didn't feel like Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves was an emotional poem, and that this other really sentimental song, I think by Garth Nix or something, I'm not sure. Oh no, Garth Nix is a writer. Never mind. But I didn't think that it was. I didn't think that it was a story poem. I thought the opposite was true. There's a lesson to be learned there. That it's really subjective. Like Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves does run like a story, and this other thing is a very emotional thing about a guy and his daughter. I can't remember it very well. There's like one line in it like, "Look a little more like a mother, a little more every day." And yeah, sure, it follows a narrative, but it's still emotional, you know. And that's the thing, like with stereotypes, like, well, how do you know who's the stripper here? Or yeah, I guess you can recognize the Marilyn Monroe thing pretty obviously, but you know, that stereotype, that was, whether you agree with Marilyn or not, like, she volitionally chose to become that. And some of the Jungian analysts suggest that she embodied an archetype. That's not even a stereotype. But you know, some women love to imitate her, and others don't. But what really frustrates me most is this argument, though, that all sexuality and gender is a construct. It's an absolute joke. It's a way of marginalizing everyone and abstracting away from everyone, like abstracting away from like the being, the essence of like what a human being is. Because you know, we're not taught to distinguish gender from a young age. I mean, yes, we're taught the words boy and girl fairly early on, usually, right? But we know what they correspond to. We can identify that. Sometimes we can't tell. But this isn't just entirely imposed from outside, as though we were just organisms. You know, it's like the first word I learned in English by myself, without having been taught it by my parents, was the word fun. Because I knew what it was like to have fun, and when people used it in context, I'm like, yeah, that's estimably what I mean, and it was so exciting. I'll never forget the day I learned that. And say, in a way, the same way with maybe not boy and girl, because I learned that after I learned the Russian word already, but mальчик и девочка, like, oh yeah, like I can tell because I came from a woman, I guess. I came out of a woman. That's what I've been told. But I've been around men as well, and my relationship with men has been different from my relationship with women from the very beginning, almost instinctively, almost intuitively. And boys and girls, I could tell them apart for the most part. But there were other things which my parents tried to teach me, which they could never fucking teach me, and I've forgotten them by this point. Because my parents, you know, well, my dad at least was intellectual, and he was Russian, and there was a lot of things that he was trying to explain to me that I just didn't get, and I still don't get it, or I've forgotten it. And think about sexuality. When you're a kid, for the most part, sexuality is gross. Until sooner or later, like, all of a sudden you're interested in it. And all of a sudden, wow, that Ciara video is very, very fucking relevant, you know? And it becomes even more relevant the more you experiment with it. Or look at something like jealousy. Like, you can read all these books. You can read, like, Othello. You can read James Joyce. You can read fucking Fitzgerald. but it's never gonna put you in the condition of jealousy until you've gone through it. And then it makes all of that relevant. But if we want to escape responsibility from that, we say, oh no, it was society that pushed it onto me. But society doesn't fucking push anything onto you. That's a projection of you engaging in society, figuring out the best way of expressing through society, through a language, through directed thought, what you're going on through individually, as an isolated organism. And there's something humanizing about acknowledging that women are women. They're women, acting out of their own nature. That's not all nurture. You're not just projecting onto them something that's stereotypical. You can't just marginalize that away by reference to something similar to something else, because there's also something about every woman that a heterosexual man sees, and any man, really, that is peculiar to her. And then there are things which are similar to other things, but you know, for the most part, the only reason we even draw these inferences is so that guys can relate to other guys how they feel about a given chick, right? That's just what it is. But we know that we're estimating. We know that every one of us has different tastes and different propensities and different potentialities, and we're attractive to different kinds of women as well. But it's always an estimate, and it's anyone's guess like what the categories are. So how in hell is it a social construct? And it seems blatantly like just a huge regression, not a progression, but a huge regression, like epistemologically, to just seeing everyone as just a series of abstractions and forgetting, oh, this is a human being. Gender is not reducible to a social function or a biological function. It's something you encounter, which is mysterious to you, which is why artists try to bring that out. But then art becomes pop art, and then pop culture becomes popularized and mimetic, and then it becomes a stereotype. Well, then we forget. Well, it's like you bought a cake, and you only ate the icing. It's childish. We forget that gender was a mystery to begin with. It was something given by nature. It wasn't just artificial. And we always forget that when we become too conformist. And so that was my frustration with this generation, which says, oh, all this is a social construct. Hold the fuck up. First of all, that's a form of extortion. First, much like this fucking Wendy's ad. It's a form of extortion because you're saying, well, if society is responsible for everything I do, you know, kind of like a Rick Deckard in Blade Runner, or I guess Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that it was based on. Or not Rick Deckard, but that girl that he meets. Oh, like, it's terrifying. Imagine the insult to her personality when she finds out that all of her memories are implants. You know, that's the postmodern predicament. It's like, oh, all of you is just conditioned by society. Well, no. Because I make decisions, and, like, even society doesn't get most of what I talk about, usually. I mean, I feel isolated from society. How is it that I'm entirely a product of it? And you gotta think, you know, there are things which we can't express socially to one another. We feel like we can't express them. And even when we think we've understood one another, like, how do we know that we understand? It's like that scene in Waking Life where that woman's talking about the Byzantine conduit of your brain. It's like, how do you know that you're really just a social unit? You don't. But the reason it's like extortion is because if you can convince enough people that they're products of society, then you can get them to do whatever you want, because they'll say, look, you're creating a bad society. No, what you consider your healthy organism, that's a product of centuries of patriarchy. No. What you want to do is have this preference, which is ultimately going to screw you over, because women's nature stays the same. And feminism denies that, because it's actually patriarchal. It's a reaction to the patriarchy, but it's an extension of the patriarchy. It is just as much repressive sexually as the church had been ostensibly for a long time. It's just as naive. It does tend to idealize women as much, and it's just as hypocritical, because it still operates with these archetypes. It still uses the damsel in distress archetype while forbidding others to acknowledge it. And it basically lays a monopoly upon what sexuality and gender is. And this is terrifying because, for me as a man, I have to explore that. I need to explore that in order to know. And I can't just reduce it and marginalize it as an a priori. That's why it's fucked up that you know, they rendered Salome in this fashion as though to make this statement that gender is socially constructed. Because we're not just reducible to biological functions. Each one of us expresses his or her own nature and makes decisions. We're not mere products of society, because that's a way of escaping responsibility. And although we can generalize to some degree, it's really anyone's guess, like, what sexuality is. I think what it is, what this is really people trying to be responsible. And you know, like, when people say gender is a social construct, or like we identify certain men and women with certain colors because that's that's how we've been conditioned. No, hold on. Like, by what experiences? You haven't had the experiences that I've had, and frankly, a lot of this isn't necessarily based in the past. There are natural impulses that we have to create new things, and I think that would explain, even in a sense, the existence of the universe as something random, as something, if you really step back from it, is very strange, and you can only make sense of it to a degree. I mean, maybe it's not a social condition. Maybe it's synesthesia. Maybe in the same way that because you think about it, you can claim gender and sexuality to be a social construct, but where did society get it from? Randomly? Well, look at that randomness. Is that randomness insignificant? The patriarchal view is always that the random, the feminine, the disorganized, the chaotic, the yin side of things rather than the yang is insignificant. But it is significant. Where does it come from? Look at Martin Heidegger even. Even though he lived in a fascist society, he was brilliant at understanding the mysteries of life. Because even if you conceive of yourself as a product of society, okay, there's you and there's society, and you're informing society, which in turn informs you. You can see the cycle. But in Heidegger's view, the moment you would draw the circle, now you draw a square around that circle. What is all this contained within? You know, if the artist creates the art, and the art creates the artist, or sorry, if the artwork creates the artist, and the artist creates the artwork, what's all that contained in? It's contained within art. And what is art? We don't know. And the same thing here. Even if gender is social, and so society is based in gender, if sexuality compels us to be social animals, as social animals we reinforce sexuality. And extroversion is really concerned more with the sexual libido, whereas introversion is concerned with the willpower, as Fromm or Adler said. But what's all that contained in? It's contained within sex itself, and as sex itself is really just something emanating from the abyss. It's mysterious. We don't know why we chose pink. And it's not necessarily a historical issue, or blue. Why did it happen this way? Because we think of these things as random. When you think about them in conjunction with coincidences, it's really fascinating. And that's why, as an intellectual and as a man, a heterosexual man, and a proud heterosexual, because if you're going to argue that sexuality is something that you choose, then you have to kind of presume your choice to be the right one, right? That's another thing. Like, there's so much hypocrisy in people who say, oh yeah, you can be born the wrong way, but for the most part sexuality is a construct. No, pick one, right? You're right. Or just like, if it's going to be paradoxical, I'm not buying into that as a paradox. I think you're just bullshitting at that point. The thing is, a lot of people are adolescents, and Kohlberg was right. Most people, apparently, at least up until a certain age, live life in conformism. They think of morals as conforming to gender roles. This is conventional morality. Or conforming to the law, which is also conventional morality, just slightly more involved. And a lot of people don't make it to the post-conventional stage. Thankfully, I've been around people who aren't that conformist. But you know, for the most part, if that's your mentality, if you go around looking to society to tell you how to behave, and you project that your own view of society onto the world. And so you think that you're a product of society because you're volitionally trying to be a product of society. You're trying to be a social unit. You're trying to be socially conditioned. And you're trying to conform to a stereotype. But you forget that a lot of people conform to these stereotypes just for fun. They don't think of it as participation in society. They think of it as just having a good time. Because they can do that and not take it too seriously. But if you're on that level and that's all you know of morality, then you take it seriously. Life becomes an expression of what you think society is. And your life becomes an expression of what you think society is. But you forget that in a way society is what you project also. You're making these decisions. You're allowing yourself to be conditioned by people. The people you're trying to impress are influencing how you see the world. But society is you. Because ultimately you're making these decisions, you're choosing to have these experiences. And society, as far as it influences you, as far as it's yourself, it is really your own creation. There's another way of viewing society too, though. When you stop doing that, and then society becomes other. And then society becomes the enemy. You see these trends come up over and over and over again, and you realize, okay, part of it's internal, and me reacting to it, but part of it is external. And the reason that society is now something other than me is because I have to define myself as something other than it. But a lot of people don't get to that point. So what I'm doing right now is raging against society by acknowledging that it overrates itself. People engaged in these trends think that they are unified and as victims of a common machine. But really, it's kind of like what I was saying about racism. Racism doesn't exist, but it's a medical disease. So long as people think it exists as something external to them, it's a problem. So in the same way, you might say society doesn't exist, but as long as people think that it exists, it's a problem. Because really, if we looked at it, every one of us individually has a different view of what society is. If we could just realize that, we would all wake up, we'd all mature more, and we'd take back our own independence, our own bodies, our own sexual appetites, and we wouldn't need to make our thinking conform to something or pretend that it already does. To pretend that we could just reduce it all to social function and biological function, that attraction can be atomizable to all of this, and as one brilliant intellectual I know said, there's a difference between putting something in front of you and putting it beside you. You don't want to abstract away people, because people aren't just acting out of conformism all the time. They're not just a bunch of phonies. And then we're not doomed to that, because you are being a phony if you think that. But not everyone's like that. People aren't necessarily doing things because they're trying to conform to what's around them. They're acting out of their own impulses. And if you just presume that they're just conforming, then you're going to conform, and you're going to compel them to conform. You're going to interpret everything that they do sociologically as a social unit rather than individually, and frankly, that's a high school attitude. You got to realize that you have to respect people, as free willing agents plotting their own destiny. And some of them are conformists out there, but others are just doing their own thing. And maybe they're choosing from what's available to them. Still, there's dignity in that choice. And you don't, and it's a proto-fascist thing to say, oh, you only chose that because of forces outside your control. It's an insult to that woman in Blade Runner to be told that all of your memories are just fantasies. No. Your existence is unique, and you will suffer on your own. You're going to be a minority of one, and but you have to assert yourself and not let other people tell you, well, everything that you're doing is just a product of society, and we as society get to tell you what to do. Because guess what? Otherwise, we get to call you patriarchal. We get to call it all these things, and you can't do anything about it because you're just pursuing a trend and you're denying it. No, it's not always identifiable that way, and you shouldn't reduce people to that. It's unintellectual. Heidegger was talking about getting past all this idealized bullshit and getting down to the mystery of it, the being of things. What is a woman, really? We don't know. What is a man, really? We don't know. But it's a mystery that's mystified cultures for years. So that's my rant. That's my lecture on this. And ultimately, like I said, there's only so much of this that I can even convey to people, because language is cumbersome. And really, as Wittgenstein said, that of which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. And I think silence, frankly, is a form of consent, I'll be honest. I think we need to take that back. And realize also, finally, one note I'll make is about the law. All these attempts to control sexuality legally, it's a joke. Because all it's saying is that we need to enforce convention, to force people to stay on this conventional level of moral reasoning, which is where most people are, for the greatest good, for the greatest number of people, because people can't be trusted. But people, even though some people can't be trusted, and there's evil in the world, that doesn't mean that all people can't be trusted, and that is evil intrinsic to human nature. I think underlying all of this, even people who claim that nature to be a social construct, to be artificial, they still believe in it. They just believe in what Hobbes believed, that people are fundamentally selfish and therefore need to be controlled by society. But if you get out of that mindset and realize that even the thinkers who innovated all this post-structural stuff, while we're trying to liberate the human being and not turn it into its own form of conformism, I think you'd see that there's much more depth to human nature, and it depends a lot more on individual responsibility. And frankly, why worry about it? Why not just have fun with it? Sexuality might very well, the church tried to make it into something that was controlled and strictly for reproduction. Science tried to turn it into that too, to something utilitarian. And like Watts was saying, whether it's the church that you believe in the mechanical view, it's still depersonalizing. You still feel like you don't really belong. Why not have a joyous cosmology? Why not say sexuality is eros, and that's pervasive throughout all the universe? And you're engaged in that, and it's mysterious. And part of the wonder of Shiva that she dances the universe not knowing how it's done.